Victory Campaign. In the final months of the Second World War, Canadian forces take part in the epic struggle for the liberation of Western Europe. Under the most treacherous and uncompromising conditions, the pursuit and final defeat of Nazi tyranny comes at a high price, as Germany fights to the bitter end. Everywhere, men are pushed to their limits. The thrill of impending victory is increasingly replaced with the horror of a world at war. For those who survive, their experiences and impressions are still fresh in their memories. This is the story of the final campaign in Europe, told through the eyes of the men who fight for bloody victory. August 19th, 1942. The deadliest day for the Canadian Army in the Second World War. In a disastrous early morning raid, over 4,000 Canadians from Canada's 2nd Division are killed, wounded, or captured at the French port of Dieppe. The results leave a legacy of bitterness and sorrow the Canadian soldiers are eager to avenge. Just over 2 years later, on September 3rd, 1944, the fortunes of war change, and the 2nd Canadian Division returns to Dieppe, this time to parade triumphantly and emotionally through the streets of the port city, including Lieutenant Joe Nixon from Canada's Black Watch.
When we took part in the parade, it was a wonderful experience, and we were very proud to be back there and marching through to a city that had, the Black Watch and the 2nd Division had a terrible experience in. People were just so delighted and so thrilled and so excited about the fact that they'd been liberated, and then that it was the 2nd Division that did it. And the reception was just unbelievable.
With the German collapse in Normandy, the pursuit phase of the Victory Campaign begins. At breakneck speed, Canadian forces chase the retreating German army up the Channel coast of France, along the long left flank of the Allied advance.
A pursuit is a particular type of army maneuver where you have to keep the enemy on the move in retreating, and if you don't keep pushing, they have time to dig in and set up a strong defense. It's exhausting physically and kind of exhausting mentally, but the hazards are far less, although we had, over the time, a number of casualties, even in the pursuit.
As the Allies move farther away from Normandy, another deep-water port is needed to supply the advancing war machine. The Canadian Army is divided, sent racing up the Channel coast to capture one of the German-held port cities, while 4th Division heads towards Belgium, and 2nd Division is en route to Dunkirk. 3rd Division attacks the port of Boulogne-sur-Mer. After 5 days of heavy fighting, the medieval town finally falls, but the Germans destroy the port facilities, rendering it of little use to the Allies. The next attempt came in the Calais area, the most formidable part of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Expecting the Allied invasion here, Hitler ordered massive defenses to be built in order to control the channel and destroy any seaborne enemy. This time, the attack will come by land and air. Bill Bettridge recalls the moment the bombers attack Cape Grenade.
England, I don't know how many miles, 25 miles or so away, are getting an awful beating from these big guns in this area. And so they decided to send 500 bombers over here, 500 bombers. And our 8th Brigade and the Queen's Own Rifles were coming in from this way. When we heard the planes come, we moved up to the fringe of that, and it took them probably a half an hour in multiples of 15 or 20 airplanes. By the time they took off in England, they turned around, they're back home in 10 minutes. The ground was just shaking. So there was craters here at the time. You could put your double garage in. The feeling of relief with all this kind of power helping us, the feeling of all the guys with all these planes and the ground trembling, it's just so good to feel we had so much help. And they blasted this place pretty good.
After the bombing, Canadian troops capture the massive bunkers that threatened the English coast. However, before their arrival, the German crews destroy the enormous guns housed in these concrete fortifications. For the first time, Bill Bettridge is able to get a close look at them, something he was unable to do in 1944.
I feel pretty fortunate to be among the people, among the soldiers that come up and got this thing out of commission. And it was about a half an hour of steady pounding of big shells. And you wouldn't think anybody could survive. You wouldn't think this thing would even be here, but look at it, it's still here. And 4 or 5 feet of concrete on the top and the sides, you could bounce one off and it wouldn't hurt it.
All along the Channel coast, these giant fortifications are captured by advancing Canadian troops. But the port facilities, like those in Calais, are destroyed by retreating Germans. Today, remnants of Hitler's Atlantic Wall can be seen, left as a lasting reminder of the power and brutality of the Nazi regime, and monuments to the costly and bloody liberation of Northwest Europe. After Calais, the Canadian Army advances towards Dunkirk, the site of the mass evacuation in 1940 prior to the fall of France. Stretched too thin by the time they reach the outskirts, the Canadians are unable to capture the coastal fortress. Instead, 2nd Division is ordered to cordon off Dunkirk and contain the German defenders inside a seaside prison. On September 12th, the tiny village of Speicher is attacked by the Black Watch as part of the plan to reduce the Dunkirk garrison. Lieutenant Joe Nixon recalls the story of a simple operation that goes very wrong.
My first experience with the Germans, I think, was when we got to area of Speicher, into that area. Our attack was, I think, very successful in that we got in there without too much difficulty. And it was a counterattack that they threw at us. I caught some of our troops by surprise, and they had us with our heads down. We collected the troops that we could get in touch with, and we all moved over to the schoolhouse just next to the church and the cemetery. And there were about 55 of us that got into that schoolhouse.
At midnight, the Germans discover the Black Watch, and all hell breaks loose.
I took over the job of running upstairs and throwing grenades out through a big hole in the roof that there was. I think I probably had about 3 trips down to replenish and got up again, and they must have thrown one back up at me. I had a very brief recollection of a flash and a thundering noise, but I ended up at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't remember anything until the following morning at about 9 o'clock when I came to. And when I did, there were 2 men that were still there. They told me that there were 18 wounded that we had in the room at the back.
The rest of the Black Watch tried to escape in the middle of the night, but are captured by the Germans. In order to protect the wounded and save themselves from capture, the 3 men are forced to fight off continuous German attacks.
And we had all sorts of rifles and all sorts of ammunition and around us. We wanted to think that there were a lot more of us than just the 3 of us there. So we fired the Brennan single round. The other chap and I fired the rifles, and we just kept firing and off into the graveyard. They'd sneak up on us, and they'd throw grenades in. We had several grenades thrown in at us, but they didn't hold on to them too long after pulling the pin. They didn't realize that we could throw them back, so we were tossing them back at them. But this went on till, I guess, about 5 o'clock in the evening, and we got so fed up, and our rifles were starting to, that we were using. We were using our rifle, we were firing them so often that in order to get the bolt home, you'd almost have to pull it up and kick it open with your foot. The last time they came up and said, "You come on, Canadians, give up. You don't have to fight anymore. We'll look after you and you'll be fine." And that was enough to get our dander up. So I took the Piat gun that was there. I don't know why we hadn't thought of it earlier, but we had ammunition, and I put one in, and the only thing we could do was just get around the corner and stand by the door, and I just came out and let it go. It went off with an awful bang, right about 15 feet from where I was standing. And we never heard another word out of them. That stopped everything.
Without food, ammunition, or water, Joe Nixon and the small band of Black Watch Highlanders hold out for 30 hours until finally rescued by a fighting patrol.
I feel coming through that awful experience was just a miracle. And naturally, I'm delighted that I was able to survive it.
Neither Joe nor his comrades ever receive official recognition for their bravery. But fortunately for Joe and the Black Watch, they are not ordered to renew an attack on Speicher. Instead, the Allies catch a break. Further up the coast, the Germans flee from the Belgian city of Antwerp and leave the huge port undamaged. Finally, the Allies have the port they desperately need, but one of the bloodiest campaigns in Canadian history will have to be fought before they can use it. For the Allies, the capture of the massive port city of Antwerp should have been a great victory. However, the Germans fortify both sides of the Scheldt estuary, denying access to the newly acquired harbor. For Antwerp to be opened, the Scheldt would have to be taken. The first attacks by Canadian troops are in the southern flank of the Scheldt, along the Leopold Canal, in an area known as the Breskin's Pocket. On September 13, 1944, the Algonquin Regiment of 4th Division attempts the first crossing at this spot on the Leopold Canal. The brief but fierce firefight ends with the Algonquins losing 134 men and their foothold across the canal. The first attack is a deadly harbinger of the attritional struggle to come, a struggle that the people of the area have never forgotten. Here, the Canadian soldier has a higher chance of dying in combat than in the killing fields of Flanders during the First World War. It will take 3 weeks before the Canadians can attempt a second crossing of the Leopold during Operation Switchback. This time, units from 7th Brigade take the lead.
We had the job of crossing the canal. We were told that the troops were disorganized and low caliber troops. The initial crossing was by flamethrower. The Germans were on the far side of the Leopold Canal, and it was hard to get at them with anything except the flamethrower.
Even with the help of flamethrowers, the Caen Scots and 7th Brigade come up against stiff German opposition.
And these inexperienced, disorganized troops turned out to be first-class troops, including a group of paratroopers who fought well and were really outnumbered us.
Jack Gallagher is on leave during the initial attack, but arrives at Canadian lines on the second day of battle. His company digs in on the opposite bank of the Leopold. Casualties are heavy, and Jack is the senior officer left.
So I took over. I was supposed to be taking over a 120-man company, but my 120-man company was 32 or thereabouts. And I had just set up my platoon headquarters when a grenade came rolling down, and then another, and then one rolled into the trench. I don't know what I did, but I launched straight up, I think. And it blew up at the bottom of my trench. And this went on for quite a long time. Now, fortunately, we had a fair quantity of grenades. And so they, to quote one of the fellows who rode home, that we played anti-eye over with grenades. Their supply of grenades ran out or load before ours, so we weren't so bothered by them.
Later that day, Jack is ordered to push his men over the dike to expand and consolidate a tiny bridgehead 100 meters into German territory.
We couldn't get artillery because they were we were only a few feet from us. They were on one side of the dike and we were on the other. So I had everybody lined up near the top of the dike. And when I blew a whistle, everybody pulled out a pin. When I blew the whistle the second time, they threw it. And so this barrage of grenades went through. As soon as that was over, the order was that they would all produce another grenade. We went through the same thing. And then after the second barrage, they went over the top, and we took a lot of prisoners. And if the Germans had known how badly they outnumbered us on the other side, they could have pushed us right into the canal. But they didn't, and we that attack succeeded. They consolidated a few hundred yards beyond. We did manage then to establish a pretty firm bridgehead over the Leopold, And we had to hold it while these guys built the bridge, which was amazing. The engineers would work with all the shell fire and sniping on their building. If anybody got wounded, he was dragged back, and another guy crept up and took his place. Really marvelous.
Once the bridge is completed, the Canadians gain firm control of both banks of the canal. Thanks to Jack Gallagher and his men, never again would Canadian blood be shed over the Leopold. The final act in the Battle of the Breskins Pocket comes in early October when Canadian troops strike in force from the sea. Caught from behind, and with no hope of withdrawal, German defenders fight to the last. Horrible losses on both sides ensue, but eventually the pocket is liquidated and the South Scheldt cleared. On the northern bank, however, the battle rages on. Near the town of Woensdrecht, the Black Watch attack a heavily defended German position. The date is Friday, October the 13th.
Our job, they told us, was to shut off the bottom of the peninsula, which would trap the German, and it would be pretty near all over by then. I don't know whose crystal ball they were looking in, but it didn't turn out that way.
Bill Davis and every soldier in the Black Watch knew this would be a daunting task. Despite protests from the Black Watch that the plan is fundamentally unsound, High Command orders the attack to commence.
We were told we were going in at dawn. Everybody was uptight, it was cold and miserable. And when dawn came and we looked across where we were going to go, and everybody started wondering, how the heck are we ever going to get across that? As soon as we get up to move, then we found out there was a lot. The small arms fire was like a solid wall hitting that road. Trying to get across that road was just committing suicide.
Due to intense German fire, the Black Watch are forced to pull back in haste. Late in the afternoon, to their shock and dismay, another attack is ordered.
I honestly couldn't tell you when the second attack was ordered in, but we really couldn't believe the order when it came down to move out again.
In some cases, terrain conditions are more frightening than the German fire.
Flat as you imagine anything, a pool table, that flat, maybe 1,000 yards wide and 1,000 yards long, and with a dike with a road on top of it surrounding it. At that time of year, it was mud. It was almost impossible to run. Some guys were crawling. I still to this day don't know how we ever got across that field and to the dike, but some of us made it. I was one of the lucky ones, I guess. And when you got to the dikes, it was almost impossible to dig in because they were so hard to dig. Trying to use our shovels or any damn thing to make some kind of a hole. It was a war of grenades almost at that time. And it was a fight to see who was going to control the top of that dike. But the guys were laying and hollering, and if there's anything that gets to you, it's when you know somebody's out there wounded and you can't get to them, or you know that if you even try, it's committing suicide. And the Germans took advantage of that too. You know, they would fire a few rounds all around the wounded guy and get him all excited if he wasn't excited enough as it was. No, that part you always have to live with, and maybe you could have got him, maybe you could have got him, but at the time you knew bloody well that you couldn't get him, you know. We stayed there then till, oh God, I guess it was 11 or 12 o'clock at night when a runner, who I don't know who he was, but I sure like to bless him if I ever found out, come up and said, "Get out." So we carried as many wounded as we could. There was only 20 of us left. Well, the fate of the Black Watch on the 13th, I lay directly at the Big Brass. I don't know what they knew about the situation, but it was quite obvious because the RCRs had tried to do exactly the same thing we were told as we did and got the heck beat out of them, and to send in the Watch to try and do it over again, not just once, but twice, seemed to us that the Army was being run by a bunch of nitwits. Any confidence we had in the senior leadership went out the window. What a waste. What a waste. In 204, we put a plaque up at Woensdrecht, and we were welcomed with open arms by the whole community. But all of those fellows now have been moved to the cemetery at Bergen-op-Zoom, and it was like reading the roster in the morning to just walk up and down there. I thought, you know, what a waste, all of these fellows to accomplish nothing. We accomplished absolutely nothing that day. I think all of those guys were prepared to die, but for something, not to just throw your life away. That's the way I feel.
After the massacre at Woensdrecht, it takes over a month to clear the Scheldt and to open the port of Antwerp. But the Allies pay a heavy price for success. Nearly 13,000 men are lost in the 6-week battle, half of them Canadian. In February 1945, the Allies line up in these fields to strike into the very heart of the Rhineland. The war is now coming home to Nazi Germany, and the fight will be desperate and horrific. The Battle of the Rhineland rages on for 6 bloody weeks. The Allied objective is the Rhine River, the last barrier to the Nazi homeland. But to reach it, the Canadians first have to fight a series of nasty and costly battles. One in particular takes place in the tiny hamlet of Mooshoff. Near these humble buildings, one of Canada's most heroic acts of the war takes place. On February 26th, a 24-year-old sergeant named Aubrey Cousins from the Queen's Own Rifles will earn the highest award for valor to be bestowed upon a Canadian soldier.
Aubrey Cousins' Victoria Cross was won towards the end of the day. They had come a long way, and they had one tank in support.
The officer had been killed
And then Aubrey's platoon is pretty well wiped out. And he's left with about 4 men.
And there was a farm building, a group of buildings, 3 buildings. And this Sergeant Cousins, each tank has a way of communicating to the tank commander. And he ordered the tank commander to bash the stone brick building in to get the enemy out of there.
Aubrey guided the tank to the building. He got him to push the wall in. Then he got off with his Sten gun, and he went in and he silenced the people in the house. He went on to the 2nd and 3rd house, and a sniper got him.
Bill Bettridge, from the Queen's Own Rifles, returns to Mooshoff, Germany.
This is a plaque that replaced Sergeant Cousins' original plaque, which was a brass plate that was stolen. It's quite a big piece, so I guess it's worth a few monies, half-inch brass. And so we had one made out of granite, and someone installed this. I don't know who installed it. I was one of the guys to come and put the wreath in a few years later. So I don't think it's in the right place. Well, for one reason, there's a window right here. And I can't see no disfiguration in the brickwork, which would have given me some clue as to where the hole in the wall was made.
As a fellow Queen's Own Rifleman, it's important for Bill Bettridge to find the exact spot where Cousins' actions earned him the Victoria Cross.
Nothing so far. Well, I'm looking for some clues here to tell us where Sergeant Aubrey ordered our tank to break a hole through this wall. Yeah, here it is. Here it is. You can see where the brickwork has been redone in this area. This is sure as the devil where he hit the wall. Yeah, do you see the difference here in the brick? Yeah. And as you go over farther, you can see where the other side has been repatched up. If you look closely, you can see the clues where the old brick was patched in. You can see it plain as day. So there's no doubt that this is the area where Sergeant Cousins broke the wall in. But once that wall was broke in, they started to surrender, and the fight was almost over, but unfortunately, Sergeant Cousins was killed in the act of getting through. He only had 4 men left. He's almost doing it all himself. So it was pretty tough going. Certainly deserved the Victoria Cross. Yeah.
Aubrey Cousins now lies buried in Grosse Peak Cemetery near the German border. Alongside him are fellow Queen's Own who died that very day. One wonders how many more would have joined him if not for his heroic actions at Mooshoff. As Canadian troops close in on the banks of the Rhine River, they come across utter destruction. Following in the path of Allied bombers that unleash a hurricane of fire and steel upon German cities, Canadian soldiers witness firsthand the crumbling Nazi Empire. The city of Cleve is destroyed. So too is Gach, where this memorial now stands in remembrance of those killed during the bombings. The last city taken is the heavily damaged Xanten, where Canadians will cross the Rhine during the final push into Germany and northern Holland. It is into this world that 20-year-old Roland Giroux comes to fight. But in Germany at this time, it's more than fighting that Roland has to deal with.
The fighting was over pretty well on the west bank of the Rhine. In a few days, they took us across the Rhine, and then we spent quite a few weeks. You could not speak to anyone. No contact with the Germans. This is what they told us, and this is what we did. There was very few left. It's mostly women on the streets. Disbelief that we were there. I guess they were told by Hitler and these people that they were still there and they were doing very well. You should have seen their faces, sour, unbelievable. They didn't say a word, but they just sneer at you, that's all they did. The Dutch had nothing to eat. The Germans had stolen everything. And you got to Germany, you got into a farmhouse. There was a lot of these salamis, all kinds of meat hanging from the barn or the shed. They had a lot of chicken, cows, everything. Well, the Dutch had nothing to eat. At all the crossroads, at all the bridges, the Germans would leave these younger ones. Boys, I'd say 15, 16, they were well trained as the soldiers, because they could fire just as well. And they would stay there until such time as they were dislodged by the Canadians. That's the only way. You never see them run away. They stay there until such time as you just kill them all, that's all. They never took any prisoners. They had to be killed. That's it. It was just a job to do, and you did it, that's all.
With only weeks left in the war, hopes of victory and liberation spread across the Dutch countryside. The towns of Zutphen and Deventer are the first to welcome their liberators.
You came through these towns, they yelled and they sang, and they were so happy. Everybody was there, so happy after so many years.
But as Roland Giroux and the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry move farther north, they come across an unexpected and sinister place.
We walked all night, and around 6:30, 7 o'clock, we got to the camp, Westerbork. We could see the huge camp. The gates were locked. The people were inside the camp. Shortly before 8 o'clock, we decided to open the gate. And these people told us that the Germans had left at 4 o'clock in the morning.
quickly, the evil purpose for Westerbork is discovered.
Most of them were sent to all the camps all over in Germany, Poland, and all over the place. Most of them were gassed.
Westerbork is a transit labor camp. The fortunate ones stay and work. The less fortunate, including a young Dutch girl named Anne Frank, are brought here en route to the larger concentration camps at Bergen-Belsen or Dachau, or even worse, the death camp at Auschwitz. But on April 12, 1945, the remaining prisoners realize they are not going to suffer the same fate.
We're quite relieved by opening the gates. This was the thing. Were they so happy after so many years? We were very glad to see them liberated. This is the thing.
The victory campaign continues north as Canadian soldiers press deeper into Holland. City after city and town after town are liberated. With triumph, however, comes tragedy. While the war is almost over, the killing, unfortunately, is not. Even during the final days, with Hitler dead and surrender imminent, no one is immune from death. Joe Nixon recalls the events of May 1st, 1945.
It was the last week of the war. We were moving up into Oldenburg, and I went out into the field, and there was a lot of chatter going on. There'd been a Jeep that blew up in the field right next to where we were located, and nobody knew very much about it other than the fact that this had happened, and they'd taken the persons in it away. And a Jeep went by, and this fellow jammed the brakes on, came back, and he said, "You're George Nixon's kid brother, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you jump in with me." He said, your brother was in this Jeep that blew up here, right here, in this field. And he took me back to the hospital, and I got in to see my brother. We chatted away. He was all bandaged up. I think he might have lost an eye. He would have lost, I think, possibly a leg. But the doctors felt quite confident that he was going to be okay. And I went back to my unit, and the following morning, I got a call and said, "Mr. Nixon," he said, "I've got a message here from the colonel for you." He said, "Your brother's asking for you at the hospital." I went into the waiting room, and about, maybe 20 minutes later, a nurse came down and she said, "I have to tell you that your brother just passed away on the operating table. If you'd like to come up and see him, you can do that." And I said, "No, I don't think I want to do that very much. I'd rather remember him differently." So I waited there, and about half an hour later,
George Nixon is one of 114 Canadian soldiers killed in the final days of the war. 1 week after his death, the world celebrates VE Day.
Well, jubilation, because we knew it was going to be over. The point was, could we survive through that time? But so when it ended, it was something we'd been expecting.
There was no enjoyment, big parties, you know. In Holland they celebrated, of course, but
We were in Germany and we were just so grateful that we survived.
I was glad for the liberation, but I could not feel that great joy that most of the people had. We had seen so much of it that that was enough of it.
Think of all these guys that never got home. Go down the cemetery and look at their age, 17, 18, 19, all dead. All give their lives to make this the free country that we have in Canada.
Victory does come with a price.